I want to talk about a disappearing act. Not a dramatic one, not a crisis, not a breakdown, not a woman who packed her bags and left in the night. The kind of disappearing I want to talk about is so gradual, so quiet, so thoroughly unremarkable in each of its individual moments that the woman it is happening to often doesn't notice until it is already complete. It happens like this. First, she learns to lower her voice when it makes most people uncomfortable. Then she learns to soften her opinions before she shares them, to pre edit, to anticipate the reaction, and sand down the edges before anyone has to ask. Then she learns to want less, to need less, to take up less, to be in every possible way more manageable. And somewhere in the middle of all that careful becoming, somewhere between the first correction and the 100th, she looks up and she cannot find herself. The strange thing is, nobody asked her to disappear. Nobody said, be smaller. Nobody said, stop wanting. It happened through 100 small moments, a look, a silence. Why do you always have to be so? Followed by a pause she learned to fill with herself. I want to trace that disappearing today. Where it begins, why it happens, what it costs, and what it means to begin slowly and imperfectly to come back. When we observe a woman who had made herself small, who differs constantly, who has no strong opinions, who seems to want nothing for herself, who fills whatever shape the room requires for her, we tend to interpret this in one of two ways. The first interpretation is that she is selfless, devoted, a woman who has transcended ego and lives entirely for others. This is the interpretation that earns cultural approval. We call her humble, we call her gracious, we hold her up as an example. The second interpretation, the one that has become more available in recent years, is that she is oppressed, that something was done to her, that her smallness is evidence of external force, a controlling husband, a dominating family, a culture that crushed her. Both interpretations share something important. They both locate the explanation outside her. Either she chose to be selfless, a moral achievement, or she was made small by others, a moral failure on their part. What both interpretations miss is the mechanism, the process, the specific, incremental, largely invisible way that a woman learns to disappear, not because she is saintly and not because she was crushed, but because disappearing was at some point the most rational response available to her situation. Understanding the mechanism is what allows us to actually address it, rather than celebrating it on one hand or being outraged by it on the other. What is actually happening is a very specific learned adaptation, and to understand it clearly, we have to go back to where it begins, which is almost always in childhood, long before any of the relationship we are more uncomfortable discussing. A child is born into a family with a self, a raw, unedited, fully expressed self, noisy, demanding, particular, inconvenient. She wants what she wants when she wants it. She says what she thinks. She takes up exactly as much space as she needs to take up. And then the family, not through cruelty but through the ordinary machinery of socialization, begins the work of making her acceptable, of shaping herself into something the world can receive. For boy children, this shaping tends to direct energy outward. Be assertive in the right context, compete, achieve. The self is not erased, it is directed. For girl children, the shaping tends to redirect energy inward. Be quieter, be more considerate, don't attract attention, don't insist, don't be so much. The self is not redirected, it is reduced. And the reduction happens through a mechanism that is far more powerful than punishment. It happens through belonging. A girl learns very early that a certain version of herself is welcomed, is loved, is safe, and another version of herself, the louder one, the one with strong opinions, the one who takes up space and wants things and refuses to pre-edit, that version creates discomfort, creates distance, creates the withdrawal, however temporary, of the warmth she depends on. And so she makes a calculation, not consciously, not with language, but in her nervous system, in the place where survival decisions are made. She calculates that being her full self has a cost she cannot afford, and she begins to pay the cost forward by giving herself up, rather than paying it after the fact. This is not weakness, it is intelligence. It is a child doing the most rational thing available to her in her specific situation. The tragedy is not that she made the calculation wrong, the tragedy is that she had to make it all. The Indian family has a very particular relationship to the concept of harmony. Harmony, the absence of conflict, the smooth running of relationships, the maintenance of everyone's comfort, it is treated as a primary value. And the maintenance of harmony in most Indian families is assigned disproportionately to women and girls. She is the one who smooths, who softens, who notices the tension before it becomes a conflict and moves quietly and efficiently to prevent it. She is the family's emotional regulator, the one whose job is to keep the temperature comfortable for everyone else. This role is not assigned explicitly, it is transmitted through 1,000 micro interactions when she speaks and an adult shows discomfort and nobody intervenes on her behalf. When she insists on something that is told, don't be difficult. Why do you always have to make everything complicated? When she is praised for being easy, agreeable, low maintenance, when the most reliable way to receive warmth is to require nothing. Over time, the role becomes identity. She stops experiencing it as a performance and starts experiencing it as simply who she is. She is genuinely someone who doesn't need much, who differs naturally, who adjusts without resentment. But she was not born that way, she was trained that way. And the training was so early and so thorough that she cannot see where it ended and she began. This is the specific cruelty of conditional belonging. Not that it withholds love, it doesn't. It offers love genuinely and warmly to the version of her that fits, and is exactly that warmth, the warmth of being received, of belonging, that makes the condition invisible. Because when belonging feels like love, the condition for it does not feel like a condition, it feels like reality. By the time she enters adult relationships, the pattern is so deeply installed that she brings it with her invisibly. She does not choose partners who will make her small, she arrives already small, and the relationship simply confirms and continues a reduction that began long before. She is drawn often to people who feel familiar, and familiar in this context means people who receive the edited version of her without noticing or asking about the rest, who are comfortable with the version that doesn't take up much space, who confirm the learned understanding that this is what looks like being manageable, being easy, anticipating needs rather than expressing your own. In these relationships, she is not unhappy in any obvious way. She is functional, she is often excellent, highly capable, deeply caring, a partner who manages everything and requires almost nothing. And she receives in return a love that is real but narrow. That love, the version of her that showed up, not the version she left at the door. The turning point when it comes often arrives not as a dramatic revelation, but as a quiet exhaustion. She has been performing this edited version of herself for so long that the performance is taking more energy than she is. And in that exhaustion, something that has been suppressed for decades begins to surface. Not always as anger, though sometimes as anger, most often as a formless grief. The sense that something was lost a long time ago, that she has been too busy managing her image to go back and find. She may not be able to name what it was. She only knows that who she is right now, the manageable, agreeable, endlessly accommodating version, does not feel like the whole truth of herself. And she is right. It isn't. The first and most important thing that changes is the verdict on herself. Because the woman who has been living in this pattern has almost always internalized a very specific story about who she is. She is someone who naturally doesn't need much, who is easy by temperament, who genuinely prefers harmony over self-expression. She does not experience her smallness as a loss, she experiences it as a description. When she begins to see the mechanism, when she understands that she was not born this way but trained this way, that the training served a function in her original environment that made complete sense, and that she is now running a program that was written for a context that no longer fully applies, something shifts. The smallness stops being identity, it becomes history. And history can be examined, can be questioned, can, with great care and patience, be added to. I want to be precise about this. Coming back to yourself after years of learned disappearing is not a project of subtraction, removing the adjustments, returning to some preschool original self. It is a project of addition, of slowly, in the safe context, allowing parts of yourself that were suppressed to re enter, of noticing when the pre editing impulse activates and pausing before automatically complying with it, of beginning to distinguish between genuine preference and trained compliance. This is slow work. It is not linear. It does not happen in a single decision or a single conversation or a single relationship, but it begins in one place, and that place is the recognition that the version of herself currently running is not the only version available, that there is more of her than what has been permitted, and that the permission she was waiting for, the permission to be fuller, louder, more particular, was never going to arrive from outside. It was always hers to give herself. I want to ask something that this episode is based on, ends with, because I think it needs more room than whatever time we have taken so far. Do you remember her? The version of you before you learned to make yourself easier to be around? Before the first correction? Before the pattern installed itself so thoroughly that you stopped being able to distinguish between what you genuinely are and what you were trained to become? She was not perfect. She was probably inconvenient. She wanted things without apology and said things without softening them first, and took up space without checking first whether the space was available to her. She was, in all the ways that matter, more fully alive than the version that came after. She is not gone. She did not leave. She learned to be quiet because quiet was what was required, but she has been there the entire time. In the moments when something you read made you feel suddenly, unexpectedly recognized. In the opinions you formed privately and never said. In the anger you swallowed so many times it became invisible even to yourself. In the life you sometimes imagine in unguarded moments that you might have lived. She has been waiting, not for rescue, not for permission from someone who finally sees her. She has been waiting for you to stop apologizing for her existence, to say, I know you were inconvenient, I know you made things complicated, I know taking up space had a cost and the cost was real, and also you were always worth the space. Come back. Understanding what was lost in the learning to disappear, what was taken, what was given away, and what the difference between those two things is, and then beginning to slow work of coming back to yourself inside a relationship that can hold all of you. That is at the heart of my book, The Love You Deserve. Not as a self-help program, as an honest examination of what love actually requires, what it feels like when it sees you, all of you, not the edited version, and what it means to begin choosing for the first time love that makes room rather than love that requires you to make yourself smaller to fit. If this episode reached something in you that has been quiet for a long time, that book is where I continue the conversation. Details are in the show notes.